Hello and welcome to Chewing It Over again. I'm back, Jack March, and I'm joined by Joe Turner, as you should be able to see on your screen. So we're here for Wellbeing Wednesday, which I'm very much looking forward to. And I've slightly hijacked this session to talk about what I want to talk about. And Joe's very kindly agreed to add her thoughts and discussions to presenting nerves. We're going to try to cover general themes about what people might struggle with, the problems that might arise and how we might differ as individuals, rather than trying to offer too many major solutions. Maybe we'll come back to that in another time. So if you are listening in live, first thing you need to do as usual is give us a thumbs up, make sure we're coming through nice and loud and clear. It does look like both of our signals are pretty good and pretty stable, so hopefully we are coming through nice and clearly to everybody. So welcome, Joe, to Wellbeing Wednesday. How are you doing today?
I'm great. I've just been through a kind of rapid move change with those two intro bits of music. First one all kind of like dreamy, and then I feel like I've been manipulated.
We've got to find a way of turning down the that explosion of noise that is that cloud.
Nice and dreamy.
It is. Yeah, there's a bit of a contrast, isn't it? Alistair Beverley's here as usual, and he has got us on Twitter, and we've got Michael here from Facebook as well, who's got us as well. So anybody who is watching live, please do put into the comments. And if you are presenting live, of course it's live. If you're presenting over the internet, or if you're presenting in person, what are the kinds of things that cause you nerves prior or during those sessions? Joe and I have got a couple of ideas of our own. We just had a little chat off air beforehand, but do put in and we'll have a bit of a conversation about those different things. I'm sure we can guess some of them, but also some of them might be a little bit different. We've obviously got online stuff with technology differences and the fact that we're not getting any reactions from the crowd, and then almost the opposite with in person. I think it all brings its own challenges. How have you found, Joe, this very quick move to online that we had last year? I don't know if anybody's noticed, but there was a pandemic and we had to do a lot from home. But how did you find that quick change? Because for me, it wasn't something that changed. I did a lot online anyway, and it's my job to create resources online, really, and I do in-person stuff. But how did you find that switch?
I think it depended on the task. So obviously some of our clinical work, and in my case particularly teaching classes, went online, and I didn't terribly like that. I'll come back to the reasons why, because it kind of relates to why actually there were some elements that I quite enjoyed about presenting online. And I was just saying to you off air, Jack, that I don't know if I'm different to anybody else, but I am aware that I'm particularly sensitive to people's body language, comments, eye movements, and in person, if I'm working clinically or teaching a class, I find that really helpful to feed off and judge the mood. But if I'm presenting, I find it quite distracting, particularly if I have something a kind of clear pattern and pathway that I want the presentation to go on. And actually, if I'm presenting online, got over that problem to a certain extent, because you've got the slightly awkward issue of staring yourself in the face, but you've also got your slides right in front of you. There's nothing else going on. I probably found it easier to focus, to be honest.
Yeah, it's really different, isn't it? Because we talked about before, I find almost the opposite with in-person talking. I don't recognize facial expressions particularly well, and if people are bored or whatever, and I don't really recognize those things, so I find that I'm able to carry on more easily in person without noticing. But then equally, probably if people are bored or not understanding, I don't notice either, so I need them to interrupt me, whereas I am very comfortable online without that sort of reaction, and have gotten very used to staring at myself in the face and talking. And I think one of the things someone asked me about, they'd not done any online teaching before, and they said, oh, what's it like to do? And I said, well, go and stand a foot from a mirror and then just start talking, and you can't stop talking until you've finished your material, because no one else is going to be there. And it is a very unusual or different circumstance without those reactions, I think.
Yeah, I think your brain works I find my brain works very, very fast when I'm presenting online, because there isn't that fill-in and anything to feed off. So I almost feel like there's a conversation going on in my head the whole time, almost creating my own reactions and feeding off them. So yeah, I'd say it's quite busy in my head, even though I'm trying to present something coherent.
Do you find you get through the material faster or slower in either situation, or are you pretty good at mediating the pace that you go? Because I think that's one thing I've noticed with, obviously I've worked with a lot of speakers over the last year or so, 200 odd, and I've noticed some people, they can't get through their material that they've created in their time frame at all, and they've got through maybe half of it, and then the other half of people seem to be getting through it in half the time that they thought they might do. Do you find you can pace yourself reasonably?
Yeah, I think I've managed to get quite a good idea of how many slides per 10 minutes or something I need, and so far, touch wood, maybe I've just been really lucky, but it does seem to have, the pace seems to have gone okay. But then, you know, you've always got the option in person or online, haven't you, to flick through a few if you know that you're getting near the end and you're running out of time, just skip over a few slides. No, actually, I haven't found that too difficult.
Brilliant. We've got Alistair's agrees with you quite a lot. I think he struggles with tech issues, which I'm wondering, Alistair, is that if the tech goes wrong, or you're concerned about the tech going wrong? Obviously, one of the only problems you've got in person is if your voice goes, which I did present back-to-back courses once in 2020, and I was fine day one, and day two I had no voice whatsoever all day, and it was rather difficult to do. And he struggles with the reading the room as well. You had an interesting point about tech, Joe, which probably differs to what, because of my comfort and how often I'm using these presenting platforms, I suppose, but you would rather a different view on what the tech does to you during presentations. Yeah,
so I would say my skill is on more the creative side and the delivery. I can manage tech, but it's not a very natural skill for me, and I find it's not like driving a car and having a conversation where you're not thinking about driving the car. I'm not at that stage of my tech ability, particularly if I'm using a new format. So I find it throws me off my patter a little bit. Whereas I know you said that you use it so much that it is like driving a car, you're on auto with the tech, which leaves you freer to focus on the delivery and the presentation.
Yeah, for sure. Have you had anything with regards to your how do I phrase this, the setup of what you're doing? So I've just bought a lovely new light, which I don't know if I can make it shadow. I noticed that my lamp that I've got was making me very orange, and I decided I didn't like that very much. But it's a strange example, but you've got a really nice background, and my room's a mess that I've got behind me, because I don't care about my appearance particularly. But is that something that you found you've had to put a lot of thought into, or change a lot around what you've been doing?
Definitely my natural tendency would be your approach, and yeah, my husband and kids would say that my attention to appearance is not that great, but I did a course actually at the beginning of lockdown with a very interesting lady called Evelyn Brink. Go and look her up if any of you are interested in particularly presenting your material via video. I think I was attracted to Evelyn when I read that she was in her youth Europe's biggest Madonna impersonator. She's a really interesting lady, very talented at business presentation, and actually her videos come across very natural and creative, and that's what she's trying to encourage in you. But she challenged us all quite strongly on our reasons for not thinking it was important how we present ourselves, and more on the point of the recipient. What makes the recipient feel calm and interested, what stops them having opinions about your appearance or background. It was quite an interesting reframe. Probably most of this audience is probably physios and clinicians. I think perhaps we think it's a little bit indulgent to focus on our appearance. We're there to provide a service, but actually if the service is delivering good material online and you taking a little bit of care with how it looks helps that delivery, then yeah, I see Evelyn's point.
There was a study a while ago, I remember it not quite well, where they looked at environment on clinical outcomes. I don't know if you ever remember that. It was a relatively small study, but they showed that the patients responded better if it was a nicer environment. So I think it was a comparison between a hospital and a private clinic or something. I don't remember the details, but it was talking about, you know, when you go into a spa and there's nice tinkly music playing and everything's clean, and everything's, you know, fresh, and the receptionist meets you and they're nice and happy and stuff, versus the opposite of that, and how that can completely affect outcomes. And I suspect that there's similar things going on with, you know, what's going on in the backgrounds of people's presentations and stuff, and how they present themselves. And I often will concentrate a lot on the how my slides look. And then I don't concentrate so much on how I look, especially because I make myself small down in the corner. So it's because I don't like to be distracting to the rest of the presentation. I don't think it works if you're not on screen at all, but I think you don't want to be distracting from people what's contained in your slides either. So I think there's a trade-off, and therefore I am therefore lazy about what's in the background. But it is something that I've taken on board recently, that I should be adapting.
Actually, you just sorry, go on. You had a question there, Jack. You get yours in, and I'll remember that thought.
I was going to say, let's pull this back to sort of well-being, rather than we're a bit into the weeds of sort of the technicals of presenting and stuff. Do you have anybody that you're, obviously not individuals, but do you, when you're mentoring and you're doing your bits and bobs, do you ever is anybody bringing up any specific I suppose nerves or apprehensions or personal reflections when they're presenting? They don't want to come across a certain way, and that changes with online versus in person. Have you had any experience of that?
I don't know if this would change online or in person, but it certainly, it would definitely be relevant online and to social media. I think the comment I hear the most is, why would anyone care what I have to say? And if I present something, is there an implication I know more than everybody else about the subject? I know that I don't, therefore I shouldn't be presenting. So unless I am absolutely the world's #1 expert on this topic, I shouldn't be doing it. So there's this real sense of, do I have permission? And I think implicit in that first statement is this self-indulgent? I hear that phrase loads from clinicians. I guess it's not surprising. We're all in an industry where our primary focus is to provide a service to other people and to care for other people. And I think we've got a really acute radar for appearing to have any wish to put any airs and graces on ourselves, or think that we're superior in any way. Physios particularly struggle with that. And I would hazard a guess that's something to do with medical hierarchy and where we are subconsciously positioned, and how much permission we feel we have to punch those ceilings.
There's probably a self-selection aspect to it as well. I was just thinking when you were saying that physiotherapists tend to have a problem with self-promotion as well, which fits into the same bracket, doesn't it? Like I know the best thing for me to get people to book courses is when I run courses.
Right.
There's nothing like, I never get more bookings for courses than when I've just run a course, and they sort of feed themselves. And I think we're not very good at selling what we bring to the particular conversation, are we? And you've talked in the past, there's loads, we've got some good resources on imposter syndrome and those kind of things. And what is it that you as a clinician or as a person specifically bring to that conversation? And of course, there's only going to be one person in the world who is the best in the world. Not everybody is. They're not going to do every single webinar, are they? What do you think about the impact of that on them when someone goes? So let's say, I'm really happy to have been asked to speak at X, Y, and Z, but I don't know whether I'm the best person to be speaking at it. What's then the impact on that creative side and delivery side?
I think if you let that stay and don't challenge that thought, it's completely crushing, and you probably won't do it because unless you challenge it and reframe it, you'll there's too many reasons not to. And I'm definitely not immune to any of those things. I don't know if any of you remember some of the posts I put out building up to Therapy Live. I called it Diary of a Therapy Live Speaker. And probably the one that seemed to hit home most with people was, what if no one's interested in what I have to say? And genuinely, that was going through my head on the day I posted it. And my reframe was, some people will be interested and an awful lot of people won't be interested. And that is absolutely all right, because, just by the nature of any material, it's not going to serve absolutely everybody. But the important thing is, it doesn't mean my material is not worthwhile, and it doesn't mean that I'm not worthwhile. And it's slightly off point, but just something that occurred to me when you were talking before, Jack, was about bringing what you add to this material. So firstly, if you've got a problem with self-promotion, then the first thing is to recognize that actually you're promoting whatever you're presenting, and that doesn't necessarily need to be anything about you. But I think a really interesting point is the use of bringing yourself personally. And this is the idea of serving the people that really need to hear you. And it's not because your story is necessarily unique or the most important story to tell, but a friend of mine who works a lot with storytelling for marketing purposes makes this point, that by really seeing you and identifying with a very specific personal point that you make, either in some cases people will directly identify with that story and that experience and say, oh yeah, me too, or it will trigger a thought in them, oh yeah, that reminds me of when I did this. And I think it's true that as soon as people see themselves in something and see the relevance of it, then it's much more powerful to them. And that's not just from a selling a product point of view, that's from whether someone finds your presentation interesting or not. And at the end of the day, we're trying to find those touch points rather than staying in generalist world that actually make things meaningful to people.
Yeah, do you think that's harder these days because of this explosion of content? Everybody's been getting more, well, it's first quarter of last year, all of a sudden people were sitting around a bit more and needed financial income and needed something to do, and this content has exploded everywhere. So it's a bit harder to get through the noise, isn't it? Do you think it's harder these days to push those thoughts to the back, or do you think actually everybody's practiced a little bit and they know what they bring now and it's a little bit easier?
It depends if you've consciously engaged in that process. I think it's harder in that you have to be very clear and quite brave. To share anything personal about yourself feels vulnerable, even if you're reasonably happy with it. And I think it's probably the more thoughtful people that are genuinely prepared to bring, I don't want to say authentic, is such an overused word, but sometimes you can convince yourself you're being authentic when actually you're regurgitating things you've heard other people say, and it takes a little bit of time to question yourself and go, is that actually what I'm saying? Is that actually personal? Is that actually the truth? And then to put it out there, knowing that some people are just going to go, oh, whatever, I'm not interested, and some people it will hit the mark with. So is it harder? Yes, if you're not prepared to, I guess, engage in that process.
I think one thing to come to, you said about, oh, is anybody interested in what I've got to say and all these kind of things. I think one of the things, the way that we set Therapy Live up, for example, is we go, who are we interested in listening to on what topic? So at worst, it's at least two of us.
Somebody's interested.
Otherwise, we wouldn't have asked. We don't ask people we're not interested in. So I think that from that point of view, people, I wonder whether this reframing, you said about, oh, someone's asked me to do this. Am I the best person to do that? Do I know more than other people? As opposed to reframing it and going, why did they ask me? What is it they think I'm bringing that's different? Bringing that sort of positive reframe to the fore. And it might be as much as you happen to be recommended by somebody else that or some other positive thing, because people don't just, well, some people do, I suppose, just randomly type into Google, in my case, rheumatology physio, and I come fairly near the top, and maybe they do just use that as a way of asking me to do things. But yeah, it's definitely reframing that's really interesting.
You're right, and I did a podcast 2 episodes ago with a panel of women, and Lucy McDonald made a really good point. She was referring to how to try and encourage more women to come and present, but this may actually make sense for men and women. But she was saying when you invite someone, it's really helpful when you're invited to know very specific reasons why you have been invited. And I guess that's helpful because it gets over that who am I, because the person's actually telling you who you are. And that, I think that shortcuts some of that process.
Just making a mental note of that, to do that when I invite people to podcasts now. I did listen and edited that podcast. Obviously, I don't remember all of those things. I've got a comment from Reese here, and I think this plays to your technology thing. So I do want to bring this in. And Reese says, do you ever use any off-screen script aid / prompts, or do you just use the slides to prompt? And I'll tell you what I do in a minute, but I'm really interested in what happens with yourself. If you're distracted potentially by what's happening with the technology, whether then those things add more of a distraction to you or not, or less.
Short answer is yes, they do for me. With things like when I was moderating, which incidentally I found infinitely more stressful than presenting, because I'm such a people pleaser and I was so desperate not to let down the person whose moment that was. I did have sticky notes all over the place about things about them that I absolutely needed to nail. And sometimes actually I present often from an office at home that has a window behind my screen, and I do sometimes stick A3 bits of paper with words. When you're creating slides and you're in the moment and you have this, well, I mean, this is personal, but you get this feel of how this slide's going to land, and it's often dependent on a phrase or a word that occurred to you when you're creating it. And I seem to have short-term memory problems, so I know I will have forgotten that kind of magic word and phrase, so I sometimes just put those on there. Having said that, I find mostly when I'm presenting, adrenaline seems to sharpen my focus and I don't even look at them. But I guess it's reassuring to know they're there. I wonder if, Reese, if you got a moment to type in, did you ask that question because you do?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, and I've had, when I've been working with people creating their presentations, they'll often say, oh, is it okay to have prompts and what have you? One of the issues with technology, I suppose, is you can't always have like the notes section up of a PowerPoint presentation or something like that. And I say, it's absolutely fine to have notes and prompts, and it's not a test, it's not an exam that you need to pass. But equally, what you don't want to be doing is looking down here, because people all know. So they need to be in some fashion where you're still looking towards the webcam. But I can't have anything like that. Like, I get distracted enough by, the car going outside and these kinds of things. And I have this thing where if I write any notes, I will just read them. Like, I don't know what it is. It's just this whatever it is, I'll just read what they say, and I suddenly become this robot that has no personality and no inflection in my voice, and it all goes and disappears. So I don't have them at all. But I think that's a personal thing. Reese has responded here. He says he finds his presentations to be much better and has more confidence when he has off-screen prompts. And in which case, yeah, brilliant. I think as long as you're conscious of where the webcam is and where you're looking, and that you're not like me and being robotic, I've certainly got no issues with that at all.
Actually, Jack, that's just made me think, well, something related to when we're talking about backgrounds and stuff. I would say that I spend more time sorting out my immediate environment and actually the bits other people can't see when I present, much more so than if I were just working in my office. And I don't think it through in any calculated way, but there's something, and it's probably the flip side of what you were saying about how it makes patients feel to be in the right environment. There are certain little things that just make me feel more like I want to feel when I'm presenting. What do they say? Cluttered desk, cluttered mind, or something? That's not the phrase. Einstein refuted that, though, didn't you? Oh, did he? Yeah. Well, no, I think he said. I think he said, well, if your desk is empty, what does that say about your mind?
Yeah. That's good. My problem is coffee mugs everywhere. That's my issue.
Oh yeah, I have those too, but I do push them to the side when I'm...
Yeah. But you're right in that if you don't feel comfortable, it's not going to... If you don't feel like, it's like having an uncomfortable chair. I've got this ridiculous leather chair. Like if I'm sat here and I'm not comfortable, that's going to come across quite obviously, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's anything that you people can do, and we're getting into a bit more solutionative. Anything you can do to make yourself feel comfortable is going to be better. I've always said this about, you know, things like doing your hair or doing makeup or what clothes you wear, and these kinds of things. If people feel uncomfortable for whatever reason, whether they feel like they're being judged or whatever it is, then you're not going to come across as comfortable, and then everything suffers a little bit, because you are, as you said, you are selling things. There's a reason, you know, estate agents and car salesmen car salesmen and women, etc., wear suits, and they're smart because they want to portray a certain look or a certain air of confidence, etc., that they're giving you good advice. And that is what it is. That's just sort of social conditioning, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think there's something weird about having a physiotherapist talking about a physical movement-based subject sitting like this in a suit, looking really stiff. And you know, I do get really stiff when I'm nervous, so sometimes I'll just put on a load of loud music and dance before I present, so that I actually loosen up and move.
Yeah, that's really funny, because when I'm in person, I walk around all over the place and I'm doing stuff and my arms are going all like craziness. And then when I present online, I tend to just sit here like I'm in a very comfortable leather chair. Reese has put up just another comment here. Feel like this is a presentation for Reese at the moment. Anybody else? Yeah. This is a really interesting point, and I'd be really interested in your reaction to this. But do you think social media, and it's been worse over the last few years for sure, being positive or negative for encouraging people to present, there seems to be this push that everybody should be putting their opinions out, but if you do, there is this risk that you get shouted at. What's your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and I think probably in the cases of people that are struggling to or feeling they don't want to present, I think that probably does feed into it. Yeah, definitely along the lines of, oh my goodness, if that goes on in social media, you know, and on social media you've got the option not to respond, haven't you? But if someone throws something at you online when you're that exposed, yeah, I think that is a concern. Actually, a friend of mine, Catherine Gale, put a question out this morning, or a thought on LinkedIn, when we asked for feedback on this, and she said one of her main concerns in presenting is the unanswerable questions, which is a bit different to what you're saying. I think, well, Reese, I think you're talking more about challenges, but it's the same thing, isn't it? I won't have the option to just, you know, turn my video off. I am there, I've got to respond somehow. And I would add to that sometimes when I'm really focused on my stuff, I think I sometimes misinterpret people's typed questions, and that's partly the typed word. And I realise, I read them afterwards and go, oh my goodness, that wasn't even what they were asking me. But yes, I'd say Reese, it probably does influence it.
It's probably those people who are on the more comfortable side, it probably pushes them to be more comfortable, and the people on the less comfortable side, it probably pushes them to be less comfortable, doesn't it? Yeah, interesting. It's an interesting dynamic, and I think there's a real something that we don't often consider is the fact that you're being recorded. So in the live situation, it would be unusual for you to be recorded, and therefore if someone challenged you, you could say, that's not what I said, or you can change it or whatever. But if someone plays back a recording of you saying something specific, that's a bit more difficult to refute. And I think that's a unspoken dynamic that people aren't necessarily aware of often, even if the recorders or the recordees, I don't know whether that's something they consider. Hopefully I'm not giving people more stresses that they're always being recorded.
I think, to give people feedback, because I would definitely worry about those kind of things. These are muscles you've got to flex, like everything, aren't they? And my first therapy live, my heart nearly burst out my chest before my presentation. Second time after 2 or 3, it's much easier. And I think it's really good if we can challenge each other online and say stupid things and it still be okay. There are certain people, I'm not going to name any of them now, who almost deliberately say stupid things and obviously almost want it to be retweeted and quoted. I'm not sure I want to go that far necessarily, but I think the more we do it, the more comfortable we get, more comfortable with making idiots of ourselves, the better.
Yeah, for sure. We used to, the other Jack and I, we used to just talk about things over Zoom or phone or ask each other questions. Right. I think if you can find someone who you're comfortable talking to and ask them difficult questions that you don't necessarily know the answer to or even are interested in the answer to, but something that is a challenge, and just discuss these things back and forth, that can really help with those questions that are unanswerable, because some questions are unanswerable and we don't know. No one knows. Or they're so complex, it's not something you can go into, or it's outside. One of my favorite phrases is, it's outside of today's talk, for example. Those kind of things, or that's not in my specialty. You might be able to find this elsewhere. I think that's
or there's the classic Jack 2 questions where you have in your mind the answer to the first bit, and then there's 3 sub questions. Oh my god, I had the first one, but now I've forgotten.
Exactly. Yeah. And getting them to rephrase that question sometimes might be helpful, which is difficult when it's in text. Brilliant. Unfortunately, we are out of time, Joe. It's gone super fast. We've actually run over slightly. I think maybe we can come back and talk about some solutions to some of these things, maybe in the future. I think that would be really good. And
can I just add in for the viewers, having been a therapy live speaker, I'd say this man here does absolutely excellent prep, make his head swell, but he does some really great YouTube videos. And actually, even though Jack March does find it really easy, I think he's really good at translating it. I wouldn't class myself as techie, but he did get me to the point where I felt comfortable enough. So it's good prep.
Very kind of you. And just while we're on head swelling, tell everybody about MeHub and where to find you.
So my website is www.mehab.co.uk, and that's a platform, a kind of platform for everything that I do. So you can find out there about my coaching services and my community, which is called MeHub, and also all the episodes of my podcast, You Matter, are on there too.
Brilliant. Lovely. So thank you very much for everybody tuning in. Thank you, Joe, for spending half an hour with me talking about this, and me hijacking the Wellbeing Wednesday for things I want to talk about. And we will be back for more chewing it overs tomorrow. Don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to be talking about oncology physio on Friday, so that'll be a complete change of pace, which will be interesting. But thank you for everybody tuning in, and hopefully have a good rest of the day. And everybody who watches regularly, as we were saying at the beginning, you'll know that the music's going to get very, very loud very, very quickly, so you might want to turn us down a little bit. But thanks, Joe, and I'll have a good rest of the day.
Pleasure. Thanks.